My First Summer in the Sierra by John Muir. June 7. The sheep were sick last night, and many of them are still far from well, hardly able to leave camp, coughing, groaning, looking wretched and pitiful, all from eating the leaves of the blessed azalea. So at least say the shepherd and the dawn. Having had but little grass since they left the plains, they are starving, and so eat anything green they can get. Sheepmen call azalea sheep poison, and wonder what the Creator was thinking about when he made it. The California sheep owner is in haste to get rich, and often does, now that pasturage costs nothing. While the climate is so favorable that no winter food supply, shelter pens, or barns are required, therefore, large flocks may be kept at slight expense, and large profits realized. The money invested doubling, it is claimed, every other year. This quickly acquired wealth usually creates desire for more. Then indeed, the wool is drawn close down over the poor fellow's eyes, dimming or shutting out almost everything worth seeing. As for the shepherd, his case is still worse, especially in winter when he lives alone in a cabin. For, though stimulated at times by hopes of one day owning a flock and getting rich like his boss, he, at the same time, is likely to be degraded by the life he leads, and seldom reaches the dignity or advantage or disadvantage of ownership. He is solitary most of the year, and solitude, to most people, seems hard to bear. He seldom has much good mental work or recreation in the way of books. Coming into his dingy hovel cabin at night, stupidly weary, he finds nothing to balance and level his life with the universe. No, after his dull drag all day after the sheep, he must get his supper. He is likely to slight this task and try to satisfy his hunger with whatever comes handy. Perhaps no bread is baked, then he just makes a few grimy flapjacks in his unwashed frying pan, boils a handful of tea, and perhaps fries a few strips of rusty bacon. Usually, there are dried peaches or apples in the cabin, but he hates to be bothered with the cooking of them, just swallows the bacon and flapjacks, and depends on the genial stupefaction of tobacco for the rest. Then to bed, often without removing the clothing worn during the day. Of course, his health suffers, reacting on his mind, and seeing nobody for weeks or months, he finally becomes semi-insane or wholly so. The shepherd in Scotland seldom thinks of being anything but a shepherd. He has probably descended from a race of shepherds, inherited a love and aptitude for the business almost as marked as that of his collie. He has but a small flock to look after, sees his family and neighbors, has time for reading in fine weather, and often carries books to the fields with which he may converse with kings. The Oriental shepherd, we read, called his sheep by name. They knew his voice and followed him. The flocks must have been small and easily managed, allowing piping on the hills and ample leisure for reading and thinking. But whatever the blessings of sheep culture in other times and countries, the California shepherd, as far as I've seen or heard, is never quite sane for any considerable time. Of all nature's voices, but is about all he hears. Even the howls and keys of coyotes might be blessings if well heard, but he hears them only through a blur of mutton and wool, and they do him no good. The sick sheep are getting well, and the shepherd is discouraging on the various poisons lurking in these high pastures: azalea, camea, alkali. After crossing the North Fork of the Merced, we turned to the left toward Pilot Peak and made a considerable ascent on a rocky, brush-covered ridge to Brown's Flat, where for the first time since leaving the plains, the flock is enjoying plenty of green grass. Mr. Delaney intends to seek a permanent camp somewhere in the neighborhood to last several weeks. Before noon, we passed Bower Cave, a delightful marble palace, not dark and dripping, but filled with sunshine, which pours into it through its wide-open mouth facing the south. It has a fine, deep, clear little lake with mossy banks embowered with broad-leaved maples, all underground, wholly unlike anything I have seen in the cave line, even in Kentucky, where a large part of the state is honeycombed with caves. This curious specimen of subterranean scenery is located on a belt of marble that is said to extend from the north end of the range to the extreme south. Many other caves occur on the belt, but none like this, as far as I have learned, combining as it does sunny outdoor brightness and vegetation with the crystalline beauty of the underworld. It is claimed by a Frenchman who has fenced and locked it, placed a boat on the lakelet, and seats on the mossy bank under the maple trees, and charges $1 admission fee. Being on one of the ways to the Yosemite Valley, a good many tourists visited during the travel months of summer, regarding it as an interesting addition to their Yosemite wonders. Poison oak or poison ivy, both as a bush and a scrambler up trees and rocks, is common throughout the foothill region up to a height of at least 3,000 feet above the sea. It is somewhat troublesome to most travelers, inflaming the skin and eyes, but blends harmoniously with its companion plants, and many a charming flower leans confidingly upon it for protection and shade. I have sometimes found the curious twinning lily, climbing its branches, showing no fear but rather congenial companionship. Sheep eat it without apparent ill effects. So do horses to some extent, though not fond of it. And to many persons, it is harmless. Like most other things not apparently useful to man, it has few friends. And the blind question, why was it made, goes on and on with never a guess that first of all, it might have been made for itself. Brown's Flat is a shallow, fertile valley on the top of the divide between the North Fork of the Merced and Bull Creek, commanding magnificent views in every direction. Here, the adventurous pioneer David Brown made his headquarters for many years, dividing his time between goat hunting and bear hunting. Where could lonely hunter find a better solitude? Game in the woods, gold in the rocks, health and exhilaration in the air, while the colors and cloud furniture of the sky are ever inspiring through all sorts of weather. Though sternly practical, Like most pioneers, old David seems to have been uncommonly fond of scenery. Mr. Delaney, who knew him well, tells me that he dearly loved to climb to the summit of the commanding ridge to gaze abroad over the forest to the snow-clad peaks and sources of the rivers, and over the foreground valleys and gulches to note where miners were at work or claims were abandoned, judging by smoke from cabins and campfires, the sounds of axe, etc. And when a rifle shot was heard, to guess who was the hunter, whether Indian or some poacher on his wide domain. His dog Sandy accompanied him everywhere, and while the little hairy mountaineer knew and loved his master and his master's aims. In deer hunting, he had but little to do, trotting behind his master as he slowly made his way through the wood, careful not to step heavily on dry twigs, scanning open spots in the chaparral, where the game loves to feed in the early morning and towards sunset, peering cautiously over a ridge as new outlooks were reached, and along the meadowy borders of streams. But when bears were hunted, little Sandy became more important, and it was as a bear hunter that Brown became famous. His hunting method, as described by Mr. Delaney, who had passed many nights with him in his lonely cabin and learned his stories, was simply to go slowly and silently through the best bear pastures with his dog and rifle and a few pounds of flour until he found a fresh track, and then follow it to the death, paying no heed to the time required. Wherever the bear went, he followed, led by little Sandy, who had a keen nose and never lost the track, however rocky the ground. When high open points were reached, the likeliest places were carefully scanned. The time of year enabled the hunter to determine approximately where the bear would be found. In the spring and early summer, on open spots about the banks of streams and springy places eating grass and clover and lupins, or in dry meadows feasting on strawberries toward the end of summer, on dry ridges feasting on manzanita berries, sitting on his haunches, pulling down the laden branches with his paws and pressing them together so as to get good compact mouthfuls, however much mixed with twigs and leaves. In the Indian summer, beneath the pines, chewing the cones cut off by the squirrels, or occasionally climbing a tree to gnaw and break off the fruitful branches. In late autumn, when acorns are ripe, Bruin's favorite feeding grounds are groves of the California oak in park-like canyon flats. Always the cunning hunter knew where to look, and seldom came upon Bruin unawares. When the hot scent showed the dangerous game was nigh, a long halt was made, and the intricacies of the topography and vegetation leisurely scanned to catch a glimpse of the shaggy wanderer, or to at least determine where he was mostly likely to be. Whenever, said the hunter, I saw a bear before it saw me, I had no trouble in killing it. I just studied the lay of the land and got to leeward of it, no matter how far around I had to go, and then walked up to within a few 100 yards or so, at the foot of a tree that I could easily climb, but too small for the bear to climb. Then I looked well to the condition of my rifle, took off my boots so as to climb well if necessary, and waited until the bear turned its side in clear view when I could make a sure or at least a good shot. In case it showed fight, I climbed out of reach. But bears are slow and awkward with their eyes, and being to leeward of them, they could not scent me, and I often got in a second shot before they noticed the smoke. Usually, however, they run when wounded and hide in the brush. I let them run a good safe time before I ventured to follow them, and Sandy was pretty sure to find them dead. If not, he barked and drew their attention, and occasionally rushed in for a distracting bite, so that I was able to get to a safe distance for a final shot. Oh yes, bear hunting is safe enough when followed in a safe way, though, like every other business, it has its accidents, and little doggy and I have had some close calls. Bears like to keep out of the way of men as a general thing. But if an old, lean, hungry mother with cubs met a man on her own ground, she would, in my opinion, try to catch and eat him. This would be only fair play anyhow, for we eat them, but nobody hereabout has been used for bear grub that I know of. Brown had left his mountain home ere we arrived, but a considerable number of Indians still linger in their cedar bark huts on the edge of the flat.